Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Last month I talked about the first three verses of the main text of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, and this time I'm going to be talking about verses 4 and 5. These first 5 verses are all about satsanga, so they're all on one theme. Just to make the connection, I will just briefly read the meaning of the first 3 verses. In verse 1, verse 1 is a translation of a very well-known verse by Adi Shankara in a song called mēhu, more popularly known as Bhajagovindam. So what Bhagavan says in this verse is, by association with being, that is association with sat, that can mean either the association with our own being. A secondary meaning is also association with jnanis who are establishing that state of being. That is the meaning of satsanga. That is, sat means being, being in the sense of real existence, what actually exists, namely ourselves, and sangha means association. So by association with being, attachment will leave. When attachment leaves, attachment of the mind will perish. That is, when the outward attachments die, then the inner attachments will die, is the idea. Those in whom mental attachment have ceased in that which is not moving. That is, when the attachment ceases, we merge back into and become one with that which is not moving. They have attained jiva mukti. Cherish their association. That final sentence, aber inner campaign, cherish their association, that is not in the original Sanskrit verse. Bhagavan has added that. The fact that he says they have attained implies that though the literal meaning of satsanga is association with being, it's how it's generally taken to mean, and how we can take to mean, what we can take to mean in this context is association with those who are established as pure being. But as Bhagavan often used to say, the deepest satsanga is atma sangha, association with our own self. In other words, being self-attentive, that's the best satsanga. As long as our mind is coming outwards, associating with jnanis is the next best association. But association with jnanis doesn't just mean association with their physical form. Merely living in the physical presence of a jnani is a very superficial form of satsanga. It also has its own efficacy, but that's not the real thing. The real, that is, as Bhagavan said, more than the physical satsanga, the mental satsanga is important. So keeping our mind dwelling on Bhagavan and his teachings, that is a better satsanga than being in his physical presence. That is the implication. I mean, this is things that Bhagavan explained, this not directly said in this verse. So why I say that, when Bhagavan added in this verse, cherish their association, he's not just talking about being in the physical presence of a jnani. He mean, well, for us, the only jnani we need is Bhagavan, and Bhagavan's teachings. I mean, Bhagavan ever lives in his teachings. Of course, he's most directly present as our own being, as that which is shining in our heart as I am. But so long as our mind is going outwards, associating with his teachings will be constantly reminding us and encouraging us to turn back within. So that the implication of cherish their association. Then in the second verse, he says, what exalted state one achieves here implies in this world, in this life, by clear investigation, which arises in the heart when one takes refuge in sadhu association, that which is extolled is not possible to achieve by a teacher, by the meaning of text, by virtuous actions, or moreover by any means. That is, by the ordinary teacher, those who give lectures on Vedanta, or those who expound the meaning of Vedanta, of Vedantic texts, or by doing virtuous actions, or by any other means whatsoever, we cannot attain that state which can be attained only by clear that vichara. And that clear vichara will naturally arise in our heart to the extent to which we take refuge in sadhu association. In this context, sadhu association means associating with Bhagavan's teachings, keeping our mind dwelling on Bhagavan's teachings, which will constantly encourage us to turn our mind within. Turning our mind within is the best satsanga of all, because what as Bhagavan says in the first sentence of the 7th paragraph of Nāna, yatātamai uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. What actually exists is only Atmaswarupa. Atmaswarupa means the real nature of ourself. In other words, ourself as we actually are. So what Sat actually means is our own being. What we actually are is Sat. So turning our attention inwards is the best satsanga. So long as our mind is coming outwards, we should be constantly associating with the thought of Bhagavan and his teachings, because that will constantly encourage us, repeatedly encourage us to turn back within. That is the efficacy. So the more we dwell on Bhagavan and his teachings, the more love we will have to turn within. That's why he says, what exalted state one achieves here by clear investigation. The word he uses for investigation is vichara, which implies self-investigation, atma vichara, which rises in the heart when one takes refuge in sadhu association. So the more our mind is dwelling on Bhagavan and his teachings, the more that vichara will naturally arise in our heart. That is, the love to turn within will grow to the extent to which we are associating with Bhagavan and his teachings. Bhagavan and his teachings are really one, because why Bhagavan came, as Sadhuam often used to say, Bhagavan didn't just come to be the subject of a story. Bhagavan came to give us these teachings. So Bhagavan, yes, when we're looking outwards, we can say Bhagavan is still living on in his teachings. Of course, he's living most directly in our heart as our own being, I am. But outwardly, he's living in the form of his teachings, which are constantly reminding us to turn within. And then in the 3rd verse, he says, if one adheres to living with those who are sadhus, for what are all these restrictions, these niyamas? That is, Bhagavan wrote this verse in all these verses are translations, by the way, but Bhagavan wrote this verse when someone, I think it was Echamal or some one lady was who was very orthodox in her habits, and she very strictly observed fasts on particular festivals, times of festivals or significant times. She would observe fast. Sometimes she would fast even for more than one day. So in that context, Bhagavan came across the Sanskrit original of this verse, and he translated it for her. So if one adheres to living with those who are sadhus, for what are all these restrictions? When the air of the excellent cool southern breeze is blowing, you say, what is the purpose of having a fan? That is, a fan is useful when it's hot, but when the cool southern breeze is blowing, what need is there for a fan? Likewise, when we are in the association, when we are blessed to have association with sadhus, to live in their company, which means not only physically living in their company, even mentally, our mind should be dwelling in the company of Bhagavan, should be dwelling on him and his teachings. If we do so, all other restrictions, all other practices become unnecessary, because ultimately, the only practice that will annihilate ego is vichara. And that vichara will rise in our heart to the extent that is the love to turn within, to practice vichara will rise in our heart to the extent to which we associate with Bhagavan. We live with Bhagavan. That doesn't mean live physically with Bhagavan, but our mind is constantly dwelling on him in his teachings. So these are the three verses that I discussed in more detail last time. I just wanted to give a brief resume to get the continuity. So this time I'm going to talk about verse 4 and 5. What Bhagavan says in the fourth verse is, tāpam taṇ candiraṉāl, daiṉiyam nal kaṭpakattāl, pāpantāṉ gaṅgaiyāl pāṟumē. This is the first sentence. What this means is, heat will be destroyed by the cool moon, poverty by the good wish-fulfilling tree, and sin by the Ganga. That is, in a hot country, in the daytime, the sun will be unbearably hot, but in the evening, when the moon rises, the heat of the daytime is destroyed by that cool moon. Not literally, but it's that is the night time when the moon is shining is the cooler time of the day compared to the daytime when the sun is blazing. So that's what it means. Heat will be destroyed by the cool moon. Heat can also be here a metaphor for the heat of samsara, the burning, scorching suffering of samsara. That's a metaphorical implication of it. Poverty by the good kalpaka. Kalpaka is the heavenly wish-fulfilling tree. And papa, sin or demerit, by the Ganga. That is, the belief is if you take bath in the Ganga, your sins will be washed away. So all these things will be removed by that heat by the cool moon, poverty by the wish-fulfilling tree, and sin by the Ganga. That's the first sentence. And then the second sentence is, mudal 𝘕mūṇḍṛum ēhum miṇaiyillā sādhukkaḻ sādhukkaḻ ṭammā dariśaṉattāl tān. What that means is all these three, beginning with heat, all these three mean the heat, the poverty, and the sin, all will depart or slip off or cease just by the great sight of peerless sadhus. Word for sight here is darshana. Darshana means seeing or the sight of. So by our seeing the peerless sadhus referred to here is obviously jnanis. That is the literal meaning of the word sadhu. Sadhu is any benevolent person or good person, basically, is a sadhu. But in this context, the word sadhu is used in the sense of jnani, namely those who know and abide as sat, pure being. So here, as I say, heat, poverty, and sin. As far as heat is concerned, it's not just the physical heat. This is metaphorical. So heat can also mean the burning, scorching of samsara. Poverty means not just the material poverty, but the poverty of the state of ego is an impoverished state. Our real state is a state of infinite happiness. When we rise as ego, we thereby impoverish ourselves. So we can take the heat and poverty here, not just in the literal sense, but also in a metaphorical sense. So the heat is the heat of samsara, and the poverty is the poverty of the impoverished state of ego. At least in the first sentence, we can take them literally true. It's the physical heat that is removed by the cool moon. It's the material poverty that is removed by the kalpaka, the heavenly wish-fulfilling tree. But in the second sentence, Bhagavan isn't just talking about the physical heat and the material poverty. He's talking, but by implication, it's the heat of samsara, the burning suffering of the state of samsara, and the poverty is the impoverished state of ego. So all these three, beginning with heat, will depart just by merely seeing the peerless sadhus. So that's the meaning of that verse. And then the fifth verse, there's an interesting contrast between this fourth and fifth verse. What he says in the fifth verse is, kammayam am tetangal, kal man am devangal, mahatukagalaku, ēhum am. What that means is thetas, which are composed of water, and deities, which are of stone, or earth, are not at all akin to those Mahatmas. Thetas mean sacred bathing places, and so they're composed of water. Deities here means the images of God, which may be composed of stone or earth. They are not at all akin or similar or comparable or equal to those Mahatmas. Mahatmas means great souls. Here it's referring to jnanis. And then he goes on to say, Abe is referring, Abe means they, it's referring to the theatres, the holy waters, and the images of deities. They, Abe, Ēnil Nālal Tūmē Avipā. That means sorry, there's one word I missed there. Amma. Amma means, it's an expression of ah. It means more or less the same as ah in English. Amma. It can also, well, no, not here. I don't think it can be. Yeah, it means ah. They give rise to purity by countless days. That is the holy bathing places like the Ganga, and so many other. Most places of pilgrimage, most kshetras, most holy places, in addition to temples, they also have theatres, places to bathe, and the holy waters are said to remove the sins and so on. And worshipping the deities also does so. Well, they give rise to purity, as he says. So they will give rise to purity by countless days. By countless days implies it gradually over a long period of time. That is, if you have faith in the theatres and the images of deities and worship them, that will gradually give rise to purity. And then he ends by saying, sādhukkaḻ kanninal kandidave kan. That literally means sadhus as soon as they see by eye. Kan means see. That is, sadhus as soon as they see by eye, see. That is, the last kan means see. It's an imperative. So the implication of these last two sentences, that is actually their link, because the sadhus, as soon as they see, there's no verb there, but it's implied the same what's in the previous clause. They will tūmē avipā, give rise to purity. So whereas the theatres and the deities give rise to purity gradually over a long period of time, sadhus give rise to purity as soon as they see us by their eye. So the contrast between this verse and the previous verse, in the previous verse, he's talking about the great darshana of sadhus. In other words, seeing sadhus will remove the heat of samsara, the poverty, the impoverished state of ego, and sin by our seeing the sadhus. But in this verse, he talks about purity. That is, what are the impurities in the mind? The impurities in the mind are our Vishaya vasanas. It's the Vishaya vasanas, so long as we're under the sway of Vishaya vasanas, we do actions. And so we are liable to do sins so long as we are acting under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas. And acting under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas immerses us in this great ocean of samsara. So the heat of samsara is the result of our acting under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas. And our impoverished state as ego is also result from our, well, firstly, we rise as ego. As soon as we rise as ego, it's the very nature of ourself as ego to act under the sway of our vasanas. So the impurity is the very nature of ego. So what he's talking about in verse 4 are the effects of impurity. Whereas, and those effects of impurity will be removed by our seeing the jnani. But the impurity that is the cause for all those, that heat and poverty and sin, will be removed when the sadhu sees us. So the implication is, far more important than us seeing the jnani is the jnani seeing us. There's a very nice story. This story Devaraja Mudaliar used to say. That is, this was one of his favorite stories because he understood it was such an instructive incident. That is, towards the end of her life, in the late 1940s, there was a lady called Mudaliar. She had been feeding Bhagavan for many years, since the days when he was in Virupaksha cave. So by the she was older than Bhagavan. She was a widow when she was probably maybe 10 or years or more older than Bhagavan. So by the late 1940s, she was nearing the end of her life, and towards the end of her life, she started to lose her eyesight. So in the last few years, she could no longer see at all. But in spite of her blindness, she used to come every day, and she would come to the hall and stand in front of Bhagavan, as if looking at him. So one day, Devaraja Mudaliar, who was very fond of her, we shouldn't mistake this story. Devaraja Mudaliar was very, very fond of her. So he said to her affectionately, Pati means grandmother, grandmother, when you can't see, why do you come here every day to see Bhagavan, to stand in front of Bhagavan? And she turned round to him and said, silly boy, or something to that effect. That's how Devaraja Mudaliar used to say it when he told the story in English. She said to him, obviously she was speaking in Tamil, she said to him, silly boy, who can see Bhagavan? I don't come here to see Bhagavan, I come here to be seen by Bhagavan. And hearing those words, Bhagavan smiled and nodded his head at Devaraja Mudaliar. So this shows that it's more important than our seeing Bhagavan is Bhagavan seeing us. Of course, this is at the physical level. We're talking here about us seeing the physical form of Bhagavan and Bhagavan's physical form seeing us. But seeing has a much deeper meaning. What is it to really see Bhagavan? Seeing Bhagavan is not just seeing his physical form, looking within our own heart. But we can only look within our own heart to see Bhagavan when the look of his grace falls upon us. Of course, his grace is always shining in our heart, always drawing our mind within. But to the extent to which we yield ourselves to that inward pull of grace, we we come to stand in the presence of Bhagavan, to bathe in the gaze of his grace. So we can only see Bhagavan to the extent to which he sees us. And so we have to come into his presence, and his presence is ever shining in our heart as eye. So though that story about Mudal Party seems to be about the physical outward things, it also has a deeper inner meaning. That why do we need to turn within to see what we actually are? Because to the extent to which we turn within, we are thereby bathing in the gracious glance of Bhagavan's, in the glance of Bhagavan's grace. So it is the look of his eyes, of his eyes means not just physical eyes, the eye of his awareness, but is purifying us. So to the extent to which we look within, he looks upon us and we are thereby purified. So these, like all of Bhagavan's teachings, they can, or any true spiritual teachings, they can be understood. There are different levels of meaning that they have, different levels of implication. So they can be explained in different ways. We can take these 5 verses as purely just talking about the physical association with the sadhu, but actually it has a much deeper meaning. As Bhagavan said, the real association with the sadhu is not just being in the physical presence of the sadhu, but real association is our mind being attuned to the sadhu. In other words, attuning our mind to Bhagavan's teachings, immersing our mind in his teachings, trying to put them into practice and trying to imbibe them more and more. That is a far better satsanga than merely being in Bhagavan's physical presence. Because the more we dwell on his teachings, the more that vichara naturally arises in our heart, as he says in verse 2. Of course, it will arise in our heart to some extent if we are just in his physical presence, but that takes much longer. The real presence of Bhagavan is not just his physical presence, he is ever present in our heart as our own being. So being in the presence of Bhagavan means turning our attention within and sinking back into the heart. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana.
Well, thank you, Michael. So, in modern times, I mean, like we are here in 2023, how are we to identify the sadhu? I think you mentioned that. We can give a bit more practical tips on
what
that.
Is the sadhu? The sadhu, in this context, the sadhu means one who abides as sat. So long as we're looking outwards, that is, sat is what is shining in our own heart as eye. So what is the greatness of Bhagavan? If Bhagavan were just a person, but Bhagavan, of course, seems to be a person like us. But if he were merely a person like us, there would be no greatness in that. The greatness of Bhagavan is, though he appeared in human form, he was not that human form. Bhagavan is the light of pure awareness that is ever shining in our heart as our own being. So though in our view Bhagavan seems to be external, he is not actually external. There's a verse in Guru Vachakavaya, I can't remember, I think it's in the chapter about the greatness of Guru or something, in which Bhagavan says, there is no more vile and heinous sinner than one who takes the jnani, though the jnani appears in human form, one who takes the jnani to be that human form, they are the greatest of the worst and vilest of sinners. So of course, we have love for the outward form of Bhagavan. We have love for Bhagavan as a person, because that's how he appeared to us. And it's through that human form that he gave us these very precious teachings. But we should not think of Bhagavan just as that person. We need to understand that though he appeared in that human form, what he actually is the infinite space of pure Sat-Chit, pure being and pure awareness. Bhagavan is Sat-Chit itself. He is the ultimate reality. That which is always shining in our heart as I appeared outwardly in the form of Bhagavan in order to tell us to turn back within.
So the practical guidance for us is Shravana, Manana, and Nididashana,
Yes.
reading, reflecting, and practicing Bhagavan's teachings.
Bhagavan's teachings.
Particularly his original works.
His
It's
original
the best
works,
form
yes.
of satsang we can have
Yes.
with them, you know.
Yes. Because his teachings are expressed most clearly and perfectly in his original writings. In the books that record questions and answers, there are two problems with those sort of books. Firstly, they were not very accurate recordings because people were recording from memory, and people, if someone here after this meeting is over, if any of us try to write down all that was said during this meeting, we'll be able to maybe remember the gist of it, but our memory of it won't be very perfect. And if we're not understanding what is being said, we'll only be able to record what we understand rather than what is actually said. So books like Talks and Day by Day and Maharsha's Gospel and things, there are nice ideas in them, but we can't take them to be the exact words of Bhagavan. We can take, if we understand Bhagavan's core teachings as expressed by him in his original writing, then we can read these books and get what is useful from them. So one problem with these books, where other people have recorded what Bhagavan said, problem is the problem of the inaccuracy of the recording. And another problem is not only did it go through the filter of the person who was recording, not only it went through the filter of their understanding and the filter of their memory, it also went through the filter of their translation, because Bhagavan didn't speak in English. These people recorded in English. So it's far removed from actually what Bhagavan said. Because we can see the translations done by these people. For example, Munakala Venkataramaya, who recorded Talks, in those days, he also translated many books, Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu and other things. But we can see from his translations what level of understanding he had. His translations are very far from perfect. And that was true of the majority of people who are around Bhagavan. The other problem with all these books is Bhagavan doesn't, this clearly illustrated by something that is recorded in Talks itself. That is, there was a Swami in the 1920s and 30s, who even nowadays is quite famous because he wrote a book, Autobiography of a Yogi. His name was Yogananda, I think. He went to America and he started a self-realization fellowship. And he wrote this book, Autobiography of a Yogi, which was very popular. It was a very popular book among Americans and Europeans and Westerners who were interested in spirituality. So he came to Bhagavan in the mid to late 1930s. And during his visit, one of the questions he asked Bhagavan is, Bhagavan, what teachings are to be given for the uplift of the masses? And Bhagavan said, teachings cannot be given en masse. Teachings should be according to the taught. That is, the teachings Bhagavan has given us, these are the very deepest teachings. These are not for everyone. Not everyone will be, the majority of people will not be ready to accept Bhagavan's teachings. Even the majority of people who call themselves Advaitins will not be ready to accept Bhagavan's teachings, because Bhagavan's teachings are an extremely pure and radical expression of Advaita. So when people came and asked Bhagavan questions, not everyone was like Murugan or Shiva Prasham Pillai, who had come only for to know the truth and to annihilate the ego. The majority of people who came to Bhagavan and asked questions they came with all sorts of worldly worries and concerns and everything. And they were not all, the majority of them would not have been ready to practice self-investigation or go deep into the practice of self-surrender. So when they asked Bhagavan questions, Bhagavan had to give answers that were appropriate to them at their level of spiritual development. So Bhagavan didn't, the majority of answers that Bhagavan gave to questions did not represent his deeper teachings. So if we want to get the real teachings of Bhagavan, the deeper teachings of Bhagavan, works like อุළļadu Nāṛpadu, Nāna, āmabhidai, Upadesha Arunacha Stuti Panchakam, these original writings of Bhagavan are most important. Even a work like this work we're discussing now, อุළļadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham, the majority of the verses in this work are not Bhagavan's original verses. They're verses that Bhagavan translated from various sources under various different circumstances. So we can't take all of these things as the pure teachings of Bhagavan. There are various reasons why he translated these in particular contexts. So it's the original writings of Bhagavan that are most important. Of course, there are many verses. I can't remember exactly how many. I think maybe 15 or 16 or so of the verses of อุළļadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham are original verses. But the majority of them are not. So it's in Bhagavan's original writings that we can find his teachings expressed in its purest and most undiluted form. Of course, even when Bhagavan is answering people's questions, the questions of people who were not ready to come to his real teachings, he was slowly nudging them towards his real teachings. So even when he's answering questions in a more coming down to the level of a questioner, we can still see some reflection of his real teachings coming through in what he's saying.
Thank you, Michael. So Murthy made a comment linking verse 5 with Akshamanamale verse 15.
Yes, very good point. Very good point. I had thought of that earlier and I forgot about it. Yes. Verse 15 of Akshamanamale is very, very pertinent here. What Bhagavan says in this verse, this is Annuku kannai kanindri kanune kanu vedevapa arunachala. That means, Arunachala, who can see you, who, being the eye to the eye, sees without eyes? See. What that means is, Bhagavan is when he says Bhagavan is the eye to the eye here is a metaphor for awareness. So what is the physical eye is something through which we see the world, but the physical eye is not seeing anything. What is actually seen through the physical eye is the mind or ego. So the mind or ego is it's sometimes referred, Bhagavan refers to it in the last verse of Āmabhidai as manakan. Manakanaku kannai, he says there, the eye to the mind eye. So the mind eye is the awareness that sees the world. But the awareness that gives light to the mind, the real awareness that illumines the semi-awareness called mind, is what Bhagavan refers to here as the eye to the eye. So Arunachala is the eye to the eye. In other words, Arunachala is the one real awareness, the pure awareness, I am, that gives light to the mind, enabling the mind to know all other things. Light means the light of awareness. So that is what is meant by eye to the eye. So Bhagavan is not something external that we can see. Bhagavan is, what Bhagavan says about Arunachala is equally applicable to him, because Bhagavan is Arunachala, Arunachala is Bhagavan. So Bhagavan is the eye to the eye. That is, he's not just the external form we see, just like Aruṇaksha is not just the external form we see. Though they appear though he appears in the form of Aruṇaksha and in the human form of Bhagavan, what he actually is the I to the I. That is the fundamental awareness, I am, which shines in the mind, giving light to the mind. So who can see you, who, being the I to the I, sees without eyes? So what does he mean by sees without eyes? Bhagavan is pure awareness. Pure awareness doesn't need any eyes to see anything, because in its clear view, there is nothing other than itself. So Bhagavan sees us by being us. He is what we actually are. As he says in verse 26 of Upadesha Tānai iritale, tannai aridalam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. So Bhagavan sees us by being what we actually are. But how can we see him? Another verse that's very relevant here is, of course, in อุළļadu Nāṛpadu, verse 22. What he says in verse 22 of อุළļadu Nāṛpadu is, except by turning the mind back within, completely immersing it in God, or the Lord, who shines within that mind, giving light to the mind, how to fathom God by the mind. That is, how can the mind know God? The mind is something finite. The mind is something that shines. The mind is the outward-looking awareness that uses the light that is God, the light of pure awareness that is God, but that light of pure awareness illumines the mind, as he says, that shines within the mind, giving light to the mind. So the mind, the awareness that illumines the mind is the light of pure awareness. But the mind is the awareness that is not pure awareness, it's the awareness that is looking outwards and seeing objects. So how can this outward-looking mind, which is a mere semblance of awareness, it's chidabhasa, it's a reflection or an appearance of awareness, it's a likeness of awareness, but not awareness itself. How can this mind see God? It can see God only by turning back within and immersing itself. In other words, drowning, losing itself in God. As he said in the previous verse, he ended the previous verse with a beautiful sentence, ūṇādal kān. ūṇādal kān means becoming food is seeing. So how can we see Bhagavan? Only by becoming food to Bhagavan. In other words, only by being swallowed by him, by losing ourselves completely by him, turning our mind back within and immersing ourselves completely in him. Then only can we really fathom him or know him, because he is the infinite whole. How can this finite mind know the infinite whole? It cannot. So only by turning back within and losing itself in that infinite light of pure awareness, losing itself in and as that infinite light of pure awareness, can it know that light of pure awareness. So we cannot see Bhagavan without being Bhagavan. And in order to be Bhagavan, he needs to see us, which is why he prayed like this. In this verse 15 of Aksharamala, because the verse begins with that most of the verse is a rhetorical question. Kannaku kannai kanindri kanune kanu vadeva. Who can see you? Who, being the eye to the eye, sees without eyes? That's a rhetorical question. Obviously, the implication is we cannot see him. So the prayer is pā. Pā means see. So it is for him to see us. We cannot see him, as Mudalapaki so wisely said. Who can see Bhagavan? It's for him to see us. And by his seeing us, he draws us back within and swallows us within himself. And only when we are wholly lost in him, when we merge in him and cease to be anything other than him, only when we remain as him can we know him as he is. Can we know him as he knows himself? He knows himself just as I am, nothing other than I am. So until we see ourselves, we already experience ourselves as I am, but we don't experience I am in its pure condition, because we now experience ourselves as I am this person, I am Michael, I am this body, or I am whoever. That is, so long as we see ourselves as a person, we are not seeing ourselves as we actually are. So long as we don't see ourselves as we actually are, we are not seeing Bhagavan, because Bhagavan is what we actually are. So we cannot see him by looking outwards, only by turning the mind back within and immersing it completely in him. And in order to turn the mind back within and to immerse it in him, he needs to see us with his eye of grace. That is, it's his eye of grace that draws us back within and gives us the love to look deep within ourselves, to see ourselves as we actually are. Seeing ourselves as we actually are alone is seeing him. That is, Swarupa Darshana alone is Ramana Darshana. Swarupa Darshana means seeing ourselves as we actually are, seeing our own real nature. That alone is Ramana, true Ramana Darshana, truly seeing Ramana.
Right.
Namo Ramanaya.
Tanam Ramanesan. Right.
So thank you, Murti. That was, thank you for reminding me. That's a very, very important point. Right. I meant to talk about both these verses, but I forgot about it.
Sandy says many old devotees talked about the powerful experiences they had by the physical look and presence of Bhagavan. Can you please comment?
Yes, of course. That is, in our view, Bhagavan seems to be a person, but Bhagavan is not a person. So what is it that was, when you see me, what is it you see shining through the eye? That is the eyes of the window to the soul, they say. So you are seeing, what you're seeing shining through this person called Michael is an ego, someone who is aware of himself as I am Michael. But when we see Bhagavan, there's no such person, there's no such ego there. There's no one who's aware of themselves as I am Ramana Maharshi. So that is what is shining through Bhagavan, shining through his eyes, through his words, through his actions, is the light of pure awareness that we actually are. So the look of Bhagavan's eyes is very, very special. But people also used to say to Bhagavan, Bhagavan, when I come here in your presence, I feel so much peace and everything. But when I go away, all the old troubles come back to me and I worry about all my worldly problems and everything. So the mere look of Bhagavan's physical eyes, unless that is, Bhagavan's physical eyes have that power to turn our attention back within, but we must yield ourselves to that. If we don't turn our attention within, under the powerful gaze of Bhagavan, and merge that is what he says in verse 22 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, we need to turning the mind back within and immersing it in that light. So we need to immerse ourselves in that light of pure awareness. So when we come when Bhagavan's eyes look at us, when Bhagavan's physical eyes look at us, when Bhagavan looks at us through his physical eyes, let's say, that has the power to turn our mind back within. But to what extent do we yield ourselves to that? Unless we allow our mind to be turned within and to be swallowed by him, that's only a temporary benefit. So that's why people say, oh, Bhagavan, when I'm here in your presence, I feel so calm and I feel so peaceful, all my worldly worries go away. But when I return to my life, when I return to Delhi or Mumbai or Calcutta or wherever I come from, all the troubles come back again. That is because the look of Bhagavan's physical eyes do have the power to turn our mind back within. But we have to yield ourselves to that. That is, our yielding ourselves to the look of his grace is what is most important. His grace has the power to pull our mind within. But we are constantly, his grace is always pulling our mind within. We are constantly resisting that and going outwards. So when Bhagavan looked at us through the physical eyes of that body, that had the power to, at least to some extent, subdue the mind. So people sitting in the presence of Bhagavan, being seen by Bhagavan, they felt a great peace. But were their egos annihilated? Well, in some cases, ego may have been annihilated, but those whose egos were annihilated will not come back and say, oh, my ego was, Bhagavan looked at me and my ego was annihilated, because who is the I to say, he looked at me? There's no me there. But when he looks at us and swallows us, there's no I remaining to say, he looked at me and I lost my ego. To say I lost my ego was annihilated. There are actually people who say that. There are actually people who claim, I sat in Bhagavan's presence and he looked at me and my ego was annihilated. The very fact they say that betrays that there's no, if ego were really annihilated, there would be no I to say, I sat in his presence, he looked at me and my ego was annihilated. There's no, it's the very fact that they say that shows the, exposes the falsity of what they're saying. As Bhagavan says in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, to say, I have known myself or I have not known myself, both are equally ridiculous. To say I have not known myself is ridiculous because what we actually are always knows itself as it is. And we always know ourselves as I am. The problem is we know ourselves, but instead of knowing ourselves as we actually are, we know ourselves as something other than what we actually are. When we know ourselves as we actually are, what we actually are is the infinite ocean of pure awareness. To whom is that infinite ocean of pure awareness to say, I have lost my ego. My ego was annihilated by the look of Bhagavan. So people who talk about the power of Bhagavan's look, the majority of them, well, there are maybe some few exceptions like Murugan. Murugan, of course, didn't talk about it, but in poetry, he expressed his experience. He expressed how, well, Murugan, what Murugan is writing about in his verses, he's not writing about himself. Unlike those people who say, I have attained self-realization by the grace of Ramana Maharshi or whatever. Unlike that, Murugan was just talking about the greatness of Bhagavan's grace. While talking about the greatness of Bhagavan's grace, he let slip what happened. That is, Bhagavan used the mind, speech, and body of Murugan to reveal how his grace works. So what Murugan says about this is something completely different to these people who claim I am self-realized, I became self-realized, I saw the I. There's some people who say, I saw the I thought disappear. I looked within and I saw the I thought disappear. Who is the I who saw the I thought disappear? The I thought is not an object, something that we can see disappear. If that is, as Bhagavan says in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu verse 25, about ego, candiraṉāl autum pidicum. If sought, it takes flight. That is, we seem to be ego so long as we're looking outwards. If we look within, is there any such thing as ego to be found? So who can see the disappearance of ego? In the view of pure awareness, which is what we actually are, there never was any ego. So pure awareness cannot see the disappearance of ego. And ego obviously can't see the disappearance of ego because it must be present in order to see its disappearance. So that's a logical contradiction. So to say, I saw the I thought disappear is patently absurd. But people who have a half-baked understanding of Bhagavan's teaching, they may have got some little experience in Bhagavan's in Bhagavan's presence. They may have felt some peace or something. And they've taken, without understanding the depth of his teaching, the depth and subtlety of his teaching, they then begin to claim, I attained self-realization in the presence of Ramana Maharshi. Why I'm talking, there are actually such people, even there, one or two of them are still alive today who still make claims like this, showing that they haven't understood Bhagavan's teachings at all. So Bhagavan's look is definitely very powerful, but it's up to us to yield ourselves to it. That is that if we if we really yield ourselves, his eyes will turn our attention back towards ourselves, and we will merge back into our source. So if we rise again to talk about it, then we haven't yet, we haven't yielded ourselves completely to Bhagavan. That's why there were so many people who felt the power of Bhagavan's look. But that wasn't the ultimate solution to their problem, because they didn't yield themselves to that. So they rose again as ego.
Thank you,
But
Michael.
we shouldn't think, oh, they are very fortunate because they were there when Bhagavan was physically present. Bhagavan isn't physically present now. So we shouldn't think Bhagavan's grace is in any way less powerful or less available now than it was then. Because that's why Bhagavan says in Guru Vachakavai, what I referred to earlier, there's no greater and more vile sinner than one who believes that the Jnana Guru is a human form. Though the Jnana Guru appears in human form, he is not that human form. So but nowadays there are people who say, you must have the living presence of a Guru. What do they mean by living presence of a Guru? They mean the physical presence of a Guru, because they take the Guru to be a body. But such people, according to Bhagavan, are the worst of vile sinners. So those people who say the presence of a living Guru is necessary, Bhagavan's own verdict on them is they're the worst of vile sinners. But
Yes.
there are people who were with Bhagavan, some of them still alive today, who still talk like this. They've even written books. Books have been published of what they say. But this is not Bhagavan's way. Bhagavan is far deeper, far subtler than this. So his look does have tremendous power, but the power of his look is not in any way limited to his physical form. He is ever looking at us. If we want to see that Bhagavan is always looking at us, we must look at him. And where can we find him? Only in our own heart. So to the extent to which we look within, we will see his look is always upon us. If we think Bhagavan's grace is not upon us, it's because we're not looking within, we're looking outwards. We can't find grace outside. Grace is only within ourselves. The power of Bhagavan's eye, the look of Bhagavan's eyes, the physical eyes of Bhagavan, or but that which look through those physical eyes, that the power of that is to turn our mind within. So it's only to the extent to which our mind subsides do we experience the peace, the peace that is our own real nature.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Right.
Thank you, Sandy. So with regards to verse 5, I see a record here that it was actually the translation of Srimad Bhagavatam, verse 10:48-31.
Ah, yes. Yes.
And there is also a mention here that Bhagavan composed this for 𝘕āλλā. Could you tell that story behind it?
I have forgotten. I've forgotten. Maybe you know the story better than I do. I did some stories I remember, some stories I don't remember.
It was just mentioned in Day by Day that 𝘕āλλā was going to the school, and she was reading this verse, and so Bhagavan basically composed it for her.
Yeah,
that's
right.
sort of. And there's another version elsewhere, I guess, but I thought it was for historical
Well,
context.
that's the trouble with stories about Bhagavan. There's
Exactly right.
usually so many different versions of the same story. Why? Because nobody is seeing Bhagavan as he actually is. So everyone is seeing Bhagavan through their own eyes. So they're interpreting things and understanding things. When I first came to Ramanashram in the mid-1970s, there were still so many old devotees of Bhagavan, people who had lived 30, 40, 50 years with Bhagavan were still around in those days. So sometimes I would hear a story from one devotee. And when talking to another devotee, I would mention it. And they'd say, no, it wasn't like that. I was there. I saw it. It was like this. So I heard the two different versions of the story from two people who were both there at the same time, and both said the other person's version was wrong. So that's why we need to take all these stories with a pinch of salt. There are many instructive points in those stories, but we can't always be sure just because someone was there and reported it. That's how they saw that incident. Someone else saw the same incident in a different way. What was the truth of that, Bhagavan alone can know. We cannot understand Bhagavan without being Bhagavan. And we cannot be Bhagavan without being swallowed by him, turning within and being swallowed completely by him. And then there's no one left to say, I have understood Bhagavan, or I have known myself.
So there is a comment. I recently saw one of the monks of Ramakrishna order mentioned in one of the videos. It was sent to me that one of the criteria for a guru is that they should belong to a sampradaya. Can you comment on that, please?
Bhagavan, yes, that is the ordinary understanding. That is the ordinary understanding. That is every sampradaya. Sampradaya means tradition, like the Ramakrishna mission, or the various Shankara mutts, or the Gaudiya Vaishnavism, what is nowadays called the Hare Krishna movement. They are all sampradayas, different traditions. And each sampradaya has its own parampara. Or in the case of the Shankara sampradaya, there are several different paramparas. Parampara means a lineage of gurus. So if the Shankaracharya of say Srinagiri Mutt, before he passes away, he will appoint a successor. His successor will become the next guru, and after him, the next successor. So there are four main Shankara mutts and a fifth one, the Kanchi mutt, which actually isn't as ancient as the other ones, but it is several hundred years old. And so it's not everyone recognizes the Kanchi mutt, but particularly in Tamil Nadu, the Kanchi mutt is held in very high regard, particularly in the smarta Brahmin community. But anyway, these are different paramparas. Why is a parampara necessary? If a guru is a person, when that person passes away, then the guru has passed away. So the guru needs to appoint a successor. But what Bhagavan has taught us about the real nature of the guru is something far deeper than this. According to Bhagavan, guru is not a person. Guru is, he says in the first sentence of the first sentence of the 12th paragraph of Nana, Kadavalam Guruvum 𝘈𝘉𝘢. God and Guru are in truth not different. Can we say of any God, oh, that God is not a proper God because he doesn't belong to a parampara? Can we say, oh, Shiva, what parampara does Lord Shiva belong to? He doesn't belong to a parampara, so he's not qualified to be God. Obviously, that's meaningless. There's only one God, and God is eternal. So no parampara of God is necessary. Likewise, no parampara of Guru is necessary, because Guru is the eternal reality. Guru is not something outside ourselves. In that 12th paragraph, Bhagavan said, Kadavalam Guruvam 𝘈𝘉𝘢𝘢. People take this very superficially. Oh yes, every person who says I am God and I am Guru will also say I am God and expect people to worship them. Not every Tom, Dick and Harry is God. That is, so long as ego is there. Of course, the ultimate reality, God alone exists, so we are none of us other than God. So we are all ultimately God in our real nature. But so long as we rise as ego, we seem to separate ourselves from God. So I can't go around saying, I, Michael, am God. That's absurd. Michael is just an insignificant little entity that was born a few years ago, and a few years hence will be dead and occupies a tiny little space in time and space. So obviously Michael isn't God. The I am shining through each one of us, that is God. So Bhagavan not only said God and Guru are one, he also said, he often used to say, God, Guru, and self are one. What he means by self there is not our self as this little ego, he means our self as we actually are. So God or Guru is nothing other than our own real nature. So God is ever shining in our heart as I. He is eternal. Guru is eternal. So why, so long as you have a parampara of Guru, that is the very idea of a parampara, the very idea of the necessity of a parampara is based upon the wrong notion that Guru is mortal. The Guru is a person who will die. So that is not that's not the real Guru. Of course, the term Guru is used in a very ordinary sense. If you want to learn a musical instrument, you go to a music teacher. Your music teacher is your Guru. In the Mahabharata, Dronacharya was a Guru. What was he teaching? He taught the Pandavas and all the others, he taught them archery. So that is Guru in a very ordinary sense of a teacher. But when Bhagavan is talking about a Guru, he's talking of it in the very highest sense. So in the very highest sense of Guru, no parampara is, parampara is meaningless. How can you have a parampara of that which is eternal? Parampara means a lineage. There cannot be any lineage for Guru. So long as a Guru is a Guru within a lineage, that is not the real Guru. Yeah. Such Gurus, they all serve a function. That is the Shankaracharyas, the Shankara Mats, they all serve a certain socio-religious function. So, and these different, Gurus at different levels. So these Gurus who belong to paramparas, they will teach some good religious, some good principles and how to live a good life and what sadhana to do. All these, all at a very ordinary level. But what Bhagavan is not a Guru in that sense. That's why Bhagavan never if at all Bhagavan talks about a form of Guru, the form of his Guru was Aruṇāchala. He clearly says in Aksharam like Kutramutraritane Gunamai Panital Guru Guru Vayali Aruṇāchala. Aruṇāchala, who shine as the form of Guru, take me as your own, completely eradicating my defects and giving me all good qualities, or making me one endowed with all good qualities. So that is the function of Guru. That cannot be done by any person. That can only be done by God himself. So God alone is the Guru. So Bhagavan is God in human form. Lord Aruṇāchala Shiva himself appeared in the form of Bhagavan. But to give respect to the convention of having a Guru, Bhagavan pointed to Aruṇāchala as his Guru. But since Aruṇāchala is going to outlive all of us, we have no need to worry about any. Even if we want a form, we've got, but that form Aruṇāchala is going to be there long after we're gone. So there's no need for any paramparas. Aruṇāchala doesn't have to have little mountains to take over from him. It's not necessary.
So when I saw that,
but what that person said, that's true from their perspective. Right. Their understanding of Guru, that's perfectly true. But Bhagavan is not a Guru like that. Bhagavan is a Guru far more exalted than anything like that. And what he taught us about the true nature of Guru, or the nature of the true Guru, is something far more refined than this ordinary understanding of a Guru Parampara.
Right. So when I saw that, I was like lately shocked. And this is coming from a prominent monk of, the Ramakrishna order, because if Swami Vivekananda applied the criteria, he would not have accepted Ramakrishna as his Guru. Because Ramakrishna was
exactly.
So that is totally rejected.
No, but they can justify that. Every parampara has to have a starting point. Right. Well, Shankara had a Guru, and who was Gaudapada's Guru? Does anyone know who Gaudapada's Guru was? So Gaudapada was that is, Shankara's guru was Govindapada. Govindapada's guru was Gaudapada. Nobody, there's no record of who is Gaudapada. We can say, oh, no, there was a long line before him. Who knows? But even if you have a parampara, it has to start somewhere. So they can justify their point of view by saying Ramakrishna Paramahamsa started a parampara. So started with Ramakrishna, and then Vivekananda, and then all the presidents of the Math, I suppose, are what they take as their parampara. That's fine. It's okay at their level. But I'm not sure what Shankara, but Ramakrishna Paramahamsa would have subscribed to this. Or another justification they can say is he took initiation from Totapuri, and Totapuri belonged to the Puri line of sannyasis. That's why all the monks of the Ramakrishna mission, they all belong to the Puri sampradaya. So there are so many ways of justifying this.
We can justifying it, but there has to be a starting point.
There has to be a starting point.
And it has to be a starting point, right? So it's not a valid.
I mean, it's fine at its own level. It's fine at its own level. But
own level.
Yeah.
So the next question is, so we talked about in modern terms, like, the guru, while we're on this topic, I mean, associating with Sat is Shravana, Manana, and Nidhi Darshana. And then the next point is what exactly do we read? And you pointed out the difference between the recorded works of Bhagavan versus the original works of Bhagavan. Now let's go one step further. What commentaries on the original works would you recommend, and why?
Without any shadow of doubt, Sadhu Om's commentaries. Mudgana, unfortunately, I mean, Mudgana wrote a commentary on Aksharamla. That is very, very special, but that's the only work on which he wrote a commentary. So for Aksharamla, we got Mudgana's commentary. Even though there's a partial commentary by Sadhu Om, but even that wasn't actually written by Sadhu Om. It was based on notes that he had left and on explanations that he had given me. So
up to 44.
Up to 44, yes.
Yeah.
So that was mainly based on my memory of explanations that I had heard him give, together with notes which helped to jog my memory. But for works like Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham, the best commentaries we have are Sadhu Om's commentaries. But unfortunately, they're in Tamil. They haven't yet been translated into English. That may happen someday. I don't think there'll ever be time in my lifetime for me to translate those things, but others will come and translate them.
Right. We'll work on it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Michael. So with that, I think we have, so if not, so we'll just close out and then we'll just go to other topics.
I had one question.
So yes, Meera, go ahead.
I typed it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read it. So transaction during waking creates Visaya Vasanas, which makes us do more actions. At the same time creates comparison side effects, agitated mind, and the ego is reinforced. So can the mind be taught to look up the world of transaction as such it? Anything that arises from such it is such it, then during transactions, vasanas may not be created, isn't it? Then the mind is less agitated, and then it is easier to look within when the mind is not agitated. This is okay to do. Work becomes worship then, isn't it? So what the first point is that transactions during our waking state creates the Vishaya Vasanas, which makes us do more actions.
Okay, can I say something there?
Right.
We can't exactly say the transactions creates the vasanas. That is, the vasanas are what are driving us to do actions. Fresh vasanas may arise out of association. I can give an example of this. Vasanas, of course, are something very, very subtle, but I'll give an example at an analogy. Supposing we are very interested in Bhagavan's teachings. So we have a desire to understand Bhagavan's teachings more deeply. That may give rise to an interest to learn Tamil. We may have had no interest to learn Tamil at all, but because Bhagavan wrote his teachings in Tamil, that may give rise to an interest to learn Tamil. And we start learning Tamil, and the more we learn Tamil, the more we're interested, because the more we understand Bhagavan's teaching. So that interest in Tamil, that desire to know more Tamil, that arises. This is, of course, at a very gross level, but that is how one interest or one desire can spawn other, can give rise to other interests and desires. This is just an example of that. Vasanas work in the same way. Vasanas is actually the seeds of those interests, the seeds of those desires, the seeds of all those things. That is, interests, desires, likes, dislikes in their seed form are what are called vasanas. So vasanas work in the same way. So we all, at any given moment in time, we all have a certain set of vasanas. And our vasanas pull us in different directions. Because vasanas, as Bhagavan said, they come from time immemorial. So we'll have all sorts of conflicting vasanas. Another analogy we can give, a very simple analogy. There are many people who smoke. But nowadays, it's very widely known that smoking is bad for your health. So now there are many people who, though they smoke, they would like to give up smoking. They like to smoke and they like to give up smoking. They like to smoke because it's what they're used to, and they've cultivated that inclination to smoke. So whenever they're feeling a little restless or something, they like to take out a cigarette and light up and whatever. But at the same time, they're concerned about their health. They want to remain healthy, to live long and to live a healthy life. So they don't want to spoil their health by smoking. So there are two sets of vasanas there. There's the inclination to smoke and the inclination to be healthy. These are pulling in different directions. So vasanas are like this. We have so many vasanas that we have cultivated in the past. They pull us in different directions. So how do vasanas gain strength or lose strength? Vasanas have no strength of their own. Whatever strength the vasana has is a strength it has derived from us. So to the extent to which we allow ourselves to be swayed by any vasana, that vasana is weakened. Sorry, that vasana is strengthened. And to the extent to which we avoid being swayed by a vasana, it is weakened. So, for example, if we've been smoking for the last 40 years, giving up smoking is obviously not easy, because we've got a very strong vasana in that direction. But by a strong willpower, we can say, no, I shouldn't succumb to this. So we can refrain from, however strong that vasana may be. Remember, vasanas are just inclinations. Vasanas can never force us to do anything. Or we can't say, oh, I did this because I was compelled by my vasanas. No, the vasanas cannot compel us. The vasanas are inclinations. Under the sway of vasanas, we feel inclined to do something. So if we've been smoking for the past 40 years, we will have a strong inclination to smoke. But that doesn't mean we have to smoke. We can resist that inclination. So if we are firm with ourselves and decide, I will not, from now onwards, I will not be swayed by this inclination. So we allow ourselves to be swayed by the opposite inclination, the inclination to refrain from smoking, to take care of our health or whatever. Slowly, that inclination to smoke will decrease, and the inclination to refrain from smoking will increase. Many people who in the past have smoked and later gave up smoking, they say after a year or two of smoking, they find the very thought of smoking, they find very it's something if smoking really disgusts them, what they had so much liking for in the past, because they refused to be swayed by that vasana and were swayed by an opposite vasana, in the end, they actually have a strong aversion for smoking. They feel very uncomfortable if someone else is smoking in their presence. So this is how vasanas work. So vasanas are not fixed. Though they come from time immemorial, they're constantly changing. So depending on which vasanas we allow ourselves to be swayed by, those vasanas will be strengthened, and other vasanas which we don't allow ourselves to be swayed by will be weakened. So in this process, as I say, vasanas also give rise to associated vasanas. So if, for example, if we have an inclination to understand Bhagavan's teaching more clearly and more deeply, we may develop an inclination to try to understand how Bhagavan expressed it in the original Tamil. That can give rise to, if we allow ourselves to be swayed by that, it will give rise to a liking to learn Tamil, and we will learn Tamil and so on. So the vasanas can spawn associated vasanas. That is, we're not exactly, in a sense, we're creating them, but it's more, it's easier to think of it in terms of spawning, it's procreating rather than creating. Fish procreate by spawning. They lay lots of eggs, and those eggs become little fish. So we are. One vasana can spawn other vasanas, but the important point is vasanas gain their strength from us. So no vasana is stronger than us. Often because we have allowed ourselves in the past to be swayed by our vasanas, we may have seemed to have become a slave of our vasanas, but we can always free ourselves from that slavery by not allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. It may be difficult. Obviously, if you've got a very strong vasana, it's not easy to avoid being swayed by that vasana. But this is what spiritual practice is all about. In the case of Atma-vichara, attending to anything other than the inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves is a Vishaya vasana. The opposite of Vishaya vasanas are Sat vasana, the inclination to attend to our own being, and thereby to be as we actually are. So to the extent to which we turn within, we are strengthening the Sat vasana. If we had no Sat vasana, we wouldn't be inclined to turn within at all. But by Bhagavan's grace, he has sown that seed of Sat vasana in our heart. So we have an inclination at least to try to turn within. The more we turn within, the more the Sat vasana is strengthened and the Vishaya vasanas are weakened. This is why Bhagavan says, or he implies in verse 8 of Upadesha, but of all the means to purify the mind, anatinam uttamam, the best among all, is Atma-vichara. In that verse, what he refers to Atma-vichara indirectly by describing it as ananya bhava. Ananya bhava in that context means meditating on what is not other. So what is not other than ourself? Only ourself is not other than ourself. So ananya bhava means self-attentiveness. And Bhagavan says that is the best among all. In what context does he say it's the best among all? We need to go back to verse 3. In verse 3, he says, action done without desire, but for the love of God, or but for God, he says. In the Malayalam version, he makes it still clearer by saying for the love of God. That's the implication. So the actions we do, instead of being motivated by desire for gaining something from that action, just we do it for the love of God. Such action will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. So what are the actions we can do for the love of God? He then elaborates upon this in the subsequent verses. In verse 4, he says, puja, japa, and dhyana are actions of body, speech, and mind. And in this order, each one is superior to the previous one. So more effective than puja is japa. More effective than japa is dhyana, because puja is done by the body, which is relatively gross. Japa is done by the speech, which is more subtle. Dhyana is done by the mind, which is more subtle. but he gives a broad, then in verse 5, he gives a broad definition of puja. Puja isn't only the ritualistic puja in the temple. All the forms, all the forms of the world are forms of God. It's referred to as 8 forms, the 8 forms of the 5 elements of which all material and mental things are said to be composed, and the sun, moon, and jivas. So basically, the Ashtamurti, the 8 forms of God, include the whole universe. So the whole universe is God. So if, for example, you try to reduce your ecological footprint for the love of God, that is good worship of God. So if you try to not pollute more, not to, in any way, trying to reduce your ecological footprint, your carbon footprint, if you're doing that for the love of God, if you're doing that because you recognize all this human activity is causing so much harm in the world in the form of this climate change, so to avoid causing that harm, since this world is given to us by God, we should treat it with due respect. We should have concern for all the other creatures, all the other humans and animals in this world who are we're all being adversely affected by this climate change. So, on the principle of ahimsa, we should try to minimize our ecological footprint. If we are doing that for the love of God, not because of if I do my recycling and if I avoid unnecessary travel and so on, it's not doing me any good directly, but I'm doing it for the love of God. If you're doing it with that, according to Bhavan, isan nal pusane, that's good worship of God. So he gives a very broad definition of puja. And then he talks about japa. He talks about better than singing hymns of praise is japa. Better than japa done aloud is japa whispered softly within the mouth. Better than japa whispered softly in the mouth, japa done mentally is good. And that is dhyana. And better than that is then dhyana. In verse 7, he talks about dhyana. He said better than interrupted meditation, uninterrupted meditation is better. Because if we really have love for God, when we meditate on God, we will not start thinking about other things. If I sit down to meditate on say, the name or form of Bhagavan, and then I begin to think about how I'm going to pay my bills this month, or when is the next, what problem I'm going to face tomorrow, how I'm going to solve this problem, if I start thinking about my worldly problems, I'm more concerned about my worldly problems than I'm concerned about Bhagavan. So that shows my love is it's still deficient. So uninterrupted meditation on a name or form of God shows the intensity of our love for God. That's why that is better. So up to verse 7, he's talking about karma. He's talking about actions of body, speech, and mind, and how each one is more effective in purifying the mind. Then in verse 8, he says, rather than anya bhava. Anya bhava means meditation on what is other. In the context, it implies rather than meditating on God as something other than ourselves. If we're meditating on a name or form of God, that name or form is something other than ourselves. So we're meditating on, that's anya bhava. But if we understand that he is I, but he is that which is shining in our heart as I, and therefore, instead of meditating on him as something other than ourselves, we meditate on him as nothing other than ourselves. In other words, if we meditate on ourselves alone, that is the best among all. But whereas all the previous forms of meditation, of puja, japa, and dhyana, they were all actions. Meditating on ourselves is not an action. It is a cessation of action. And this, he says, is the best among all. When he says it's the best among all, the implication is among all these various different types of practice, this is the most effective way to purify the mind. Why is it most effective way to purify the mind? Because the impurities in the mind are the Vishaya vasanas. Under the spray of our Vishaya vasanas, our mind goes outwards. If we don't allow the mind to go outwards, but turn it back within, we are strengthening the Sat Vasana and weakening the Vishaya Vasana. So this is the most effective way to purify the mind. If you meditate with love on a name or form of God, you are thereby weakening the Vishaya Vasanas to think about other things. But even the God, the name or form of God is still a Vishaya. It's still something other than yourself. So it is a very effective way to purify the mind, but not as effective as this Atma Vichara. That's why Bhagavan says, of all, this is the best.
Thank you,
he
Michael.
says, by the strength of that meditation, that leads to us just being in the state of in Satbhava, the state of being in the state of being. That Bhagavan says is Parabhakti Tattva. That is the nature of supreme devotion. So why I said this is to clarify about the nature of vasanas. So we're not exactly, we are creating in a sense, but it's not we are spawning new vasanas while allowing ourselves to be swayed by the old vasanas. But vasanas are the cause of our doing the actions, and that's why they tend to spawn more vasanas.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think there was more to your question than that. So, Kumar, can you read more?
No, I just meant, so if I know the truth of myself is Satchit, then the truth of everything else is same Satchit. So the whole world can be looked upon as Satchit. So Satchit. So
no, you cannot look upon the world as Satchit.
Okay,
so long as you see the world, you are not seeing Satchit. You can say, you can look upon the snake as a rope, but so long as you see it as a snake, the idea that it is a rope is just an idea. You're still afraid of it because to you it's still a snake. You can imagine to yourself, oh, this snake is a rope. But if the snake suddenly raises up and opens its hood, then you're not going to be, your idea that it's a rope is going to be a very weak idea. So we need to actually see, we cannot see other things as Satchit without seeing ourselves as Satchit.
Right.
When we see ourselves as Satchit, there will be no other things to be seen as Satchit. So
there are no other things.
There are no other things because other things appear only in the view of ego. When we see ourselves as Satchit, we are not, ego is thereby destroyed. So that is what is meant by seeing the world as God, or seeing the world as self. Seeing nothing other than self alone is seeing the world as. So we see Bhagavan sees this world as himself. We see him as this world. So we are not seeing him as he actually is. Or we're not seeing ourselves as we actually are, because he is what we actually are.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Michael. So Rajat asked a question. In Arunachala Mahatmyam, as in the first was discussed today, Arunachala is described as wish-fulfilling tree. But Bhagavan has said very clearly that what is to happen will happen and what is not to happen will not happen. So should we understand that the description in the scriptures is purely metaphorical?
That is, what is taught in the scriptures is to suit people at different levels of spiritual development. So at a certain level of spiritual development, people go to temples and churches and mosques and gurudwaras and so on, and synagogues and so on. They go praying to God for all sorts of things. If you tell them, oh, your prayers won't have any effect, what is destined to happen alone will happen, they're not going to go to their church. I mean, if they believe you, they're going to stop going to their churches and mosques and temples and so on. So they have to be told, yes, if you have difficulties in life, pray to God. And God, that is the prarabdha, the destiny of each one of us, is tailor-made to suit our present level of spiritual development. So if we're at the level of spiritual development, but we're still inclined to pray to God for this or for that, for health, wealth, removal of all problems and so on, he will have designed our prarabdha in such a way, but it seems to us, I had such and such a difficulty, I prayed to God, and God removed my difficulty. It is good for them to believe that, because the more they believe that, the more trust they will have in God, the more love they will have in God. And slowly, slowly, their love for God will begin to supplant their love for Vishayas. That is, if we go to temple or to church or to mosque or to synagogue or to Gurudwara or wherever, if we go just to pray for material things, what we have love for is not God. We have love for the material things. God is just a means to an end. So we worship God. So long as God gives us what we want, we worship him. If he doesn't give us what we want, what sort of God is he? He's not been gracious to me. So at a certain level in spiritual development, Bhagavan had that God designs the prarabdha in such a way to strengthen people's love. They strengthen their faith. The more they have faith in God, the more they feel God is taking care of everything. Whatever I ask God for, he does for me. Then they begin to develop the real love for God, not the love for what they can get from God. But if the giver is so great, so if the giver is giving me whatever I want, surely the giver is greater than all these gifts. Sadhuam has sung a song, Kodu tabam perida, inda kodu porul perida. Which is greater, the giver or the things that are given? So obviously the giver is greater than whatever is given. Yeah. So that maturity comes to the mind as a result of people praying and seemingly having their prayers answered. So if someone likes to go to temples or churches or whatever and pray to God for this or that, we shouldn't discourage them. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said, you shouldn't disturb the faith of those who have faith in karmas, in actions. So we should encourage them. Yes, it's good to go to church every Sunday. It's good to go to the mosque every Friday. It's good to go to the temple on whichever day you want to go to the temple. All this should be encouraged. And Bhagavan encouraged people. When people came to Bhagavan, when they were at that level, he would encourage them. So, but yes, once we come to Bhagavan, we should have the maturity to understand that praying for material things is useless. Because Bhagavan, whatever we experience is what is allotted to us by Bhagavan for our own good. So he knows what is best for us. Enakena vendum, ena vendam, embadeyallam, nangarindu, Ene vida emperumane. Sadhuam sings in another song. What do I need and what do I not need? More than me, my Lord knows.
Is that epidi oral voy?
No, enakena vendum, ena venda. Yes, epidi oral voy is the same thing. Epidi oral voy. Adu evidum nanari vein. That is, he knows what is best. So let Bhagavan bestow his grace in whatever way he wants, because he knows what is best. So that is the maturity we should come to. That is the level at which Bhagavan's teachings are the pure teachings of Bhagavan should be enable us to understand that. So that's why Bhagavan tells us, whatever is to happen is going to happen. Whatever is not going to happen is not going to happen. Try as much as you may. So that leads to a higher level of devotion, where the highest devotion is self-surrender. But people who are going and praying to God for this or for that, they're not surrendering themselves to God's will. They're asking God to fulfill their will. So there are different levels of spiritual development. So different teachings are appropriate at different levels. That's why Bhagavan said to Swami Yogananda, spiritual teachings cannot be given en masse. What the deeper teachings Bhagavan has given us, we shouldn't tell these teachings to others who are obviously not at this level. If people really want to know, if they're ready to learn something, then we can tell about Bhagavan's teachings. But we shouldn't of our own accord go and tell people.
Thank you, Michael.
If people are
Um,
praying to God for this or that, we shouldn't tell them, oh, no, it's all according to prarabdha. We say, no, it's good to pray to God. Of course it's good to pray. But at least when they're praying of God, to God, their mind is directed towards God. That will gradually purify their mind.
And it goes through that 5 standards of bhakti.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
Swami Sadhu
That's what
describes.
Sadhguru
Yeah.
has explained it very beautifully in the Path of Sri Ramana.
Sai Kumar is asking a question actually. He says, please explain how to experience the meaning of the words from Upadesa Sara. And he is quoting verse 5 of Upadesa Sara. Jagata Ishaddi Yukta Sevanam Ashtamurtibra Deva Pujanam. So you did talk about this briefly while responding to Meera.
Yes.
So Sai Kumar, is there anything more you would like?
It is a bhavana. If you consider the world as God, that is a bhavana. It is good to have that bhavana. If you see a hungry person and you have food and you give food to that person, rather than seeing, oh, this is a poor wretch and I'm helping him. When I was in Badrinath, before I came to Tirunelveli, I had traveled around a lot of India. When I was in Badrinath, I met one very rich lawyer from Allahabad, from Prayag. He told me he and his family, every year they come to Badrinath and they feed sadhus there. And on one day he did a big feeding of, he gave money for feeding so many sadhus. And he was talking to me while the sadhus were eating. And he said, see, because I'm doing this punya, I'm going to have I'm going to go to heaven, or I'm going to have a very good afterlife. But see how these sadhus are eating. They're eating like pigs. So what is going to become of them? I was horrified. That is not the attitude. If you're feeding a hungry person, you shouldn't be considering they're eating like a pig. They may be very hungry. They may not have eaten, so they may be eating with great relish. We shouldn't look down and think, oh, they're eating like pigs. No, we should look down. We should look upon them as God. We should think, God has come in the form of this poor person. My giving food to God, to them, is an opportunity for me to do service to God. That is the attitude we should do it. Of course, that's just an attitude. It's a bhavana. But that attitude is the attitude we should have when we do service of any sort. That is the difference in nishkamya karma and karmiya karma. That is that rich lawyer, why he was feeding those sadhus? So that he can go to heaven. He's not doing it for the love of God. He's doing it pure kamyata. So that's not what Bhagavan is talking about. Bhagavan says, kartano kakam nishkarmiya karma. So you're not to do the action for any going to heaven or anything like that, or for any gain of any sort. You're to do it just for the love of God. For God's sake alone you do it. So if you feed a poor person, you should feed that poor person, considering that poor person to be God. And considering, you should be grateful that God has come in that form of that poor person and given you the opportunity to feed him. So we should be very humble. We should take it as a blessing of God, but he has given us this opportunity to feed him in the form of that poor person.
So Sai Kumar, does that answer your question? I know it's you talked about a whole verse, so there's a lot to talk about there. So I want to make sure your doubts are clarified there.
Yeah, the more when we read scriptures or teachings of Bhagavan, I clearly see how you perceive the right attitude brings right experience, right? So I'm thinking that's in essence true for everything. Even scientific knowledge gives you a better understanding of the world, and social life gives you better responsibility. So everything is an experience based on right knowledge. So here, when Bhagavan says you have to look at the whole world as your puja room and offer your prayers, one way to think is superimpose God, which means I'm intellectually trying to see God in everything. which may not happen every time because I'm busy with other things. So what is the right attitude that makes it more practical to see the world itself as a puja room and offer your prayers?
Yeah, exactly.
So I thought
see the world as God. You don't even have to see it as the puja room. That everything in this world is God. All the Ashtamurti means all the Panchabuddhas are God. The sun is God, the moon is God, the jivas are God. So where is any world apart from these things? So Bhagavan is saying we should look upon the whole world as God.
Kumar, can I just add to just a few seconds? In the Tamil verse, equivalent verse, it says, Yennuru yavum irayuru amenai yenni valipadal undi para. Bhagavan explicitly says, you can think the world as God, and if you do, you will end up worshipping the world. So, which means if you are feeding the sadhus, you are not going to see the sadhus as pigs, hogging all the fruit. Instead, you will be praying to them. You will be worshipping them. That means for giving an opportunity to be able to feed them is what you are worshipping them for. So any valipadal undi para is what is said in the Tamil verse. So I just wanted to highlight.
That is, it's considering in the Sanskrit. What is it? What is the Sanskrit verse again?
Jagata Isadi Yukta
Jagata
Sevana.
Isadi. That D is the equivalent of that Eni, considering it. And in Tamil, there's another nice underlying meaning there. That is, Ennuru can be interpreted in two ways. Ennuru can mean 8 forms. En also means thought. So the whole world is nothing but thoughts. And it's all a form of God. This world which is imposed on nothing but thought, we should look upon it as a form of God and worship it accordingly.
So if you extend that, even the thoughts which arise in your mind are actually providing an opportunity to be in self-investigation. Because when the thought arises, you are going to do the self-investigation, and you're going to abide in the self. So you can worship that thought.
Well, you can take the thought as a reminder. That is, that thought couldn't arise if you didn't exist there to know it. So the thought should remind us of our own existence.
That's what 13, verse number 13, ⵓڵḷadu Nāṛpadu says that even ajnanam cannot exist without jnanam.
Yes.
So in other words, a thought cannot arise without your existence.
Yeah. But the trouble is we are more interested in the thoughts than our existence. So the thoughts distract us. But if we take the thoughts as, why Bhagavan has given me this thought? To remind me that I am. So let us ignore the thoughts and turn our attention back to ourselves.
Correct. So instead of deriding the sadhus, the thoughts, sadhus, which are equivalent to thoughts, you will be worshipping the sadhus, and you will be using the opportunity of the thought to investigate your existence. Back to abidance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's hopefully that answers Sai Kumar's question. And Bruce asks, why should we frame our worship when it can be God who frames it?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
Yeah, me neither. So Bruce, you want to explain it?
Well, like a bhavana is an imaginative projection, right?
Oh, yeah.
So if we're framing our worship, that is a bhavana. Whereas if we allow God to formulate our worship, it's removing the bhavana. We're not, fighting the projection.
Yeah, that is, bhavanas are suitable at a certain stage. So long as our mind is going outwards, it's good to look upon the world as God. But better than considering the world to be God, recognizing that God is that which is shining in our heart as I, and worshipping him as I by turning our attention within and thereby surrendering ourselves to him. That is why Bhagavan says in verse 9, after that verse where he talks about the Ananya Bhava, he says in the next verse, Bhava Balatinal, by the strength of the Bhava, that implies by the strength of the Ananya Bhava, by the strength of the self-attentiveness, in other words,
Yes.
Bhavana Tita Satbhava Tirutale, being in that Satbhava, that state of being, which transcends all bhavana, that is the parabhakti. That is the parabhakti tattva. That's the very nature of supreme devotion. So, of course, we have to go beyond bhavana, but that doesn't mean bhavana is inappropriate at a certain stage.
Right.
So long as our mind is going outwards, it's good to have a bhavana, this is all God, and to look upon the world as God. It's only a bhavana, but it's better than looking upon the world in any other way. Because
Right.
it gives us respect for all, even for those who seem to us to be bad, those we have an inclination to dislike. Bhagavan says we shouldn't however bad people others may appear to be, disliking them is not proper. Because he said beautifully in the 19th paragraph of Nana, there are not two minds, a good mind and a bad mind. Mind is only one. In other words, mind is neutral. It's the vasanas which are of two kinds, subha vasanas and asubha vasanas. Subha vasanas means the good, agreeable vasanas. Asubha means the disagreeable ones. So when the mind is under the sway of subha vasanas, we say it's a good mind. When it's under the sway of asubha vasanas, we say it's a bad mind. So however bad others may appear to be, disliking them is not proper. Likes and dislikes are both fit to be disliked. So having the bhavana, but all this is God, helps us to go beyond the likes and dislikes, to view everything with a neutral, that is impartial view, treating the good and the bad all equally. That doesn't mean treating good people as bad people, but treating the bad people, having respect for them, that is being concerned for their well-being.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Last question from Ram.
So Michael, good morning from US. So when I'm doing the self-investigation, it's very clear that I'm not the mind and I'm not the body. That is, mind is, when I sit down, mind turns inwards, and I can, I guess, for the lack of better words, experience that I'm not the body and I'm not the mind. It's not just a statement. I can, but then I'm not sure where it goes from there. It's not that I'm waiting for the next thought to come, but when I try to investigate further, saying, who is this? It's again not a question. I'm investigating who is it. Then I'm not sure how to proceed from there.
That is, we are not, by looking within, we are not actually, we are beginning to become aware of ourselves as something distinct from this body and mind, but we still experience this body and mind as ourselves. So we need to look within more and more to get more and more clarity. The more clarity we get, clarity means the clarity of self-awareness, clarity of that awareness of ourself as something distinct from all these things. So that we do not experience ourselves as not this body or not this mind until ego is completely annihilated, because the very nature of ego is to identify itself with this bundle of 5 sheaths called body, and that includes the mind. But the more we look within, the more we begin to recognize that our existence is something separate from these things. But it's only vague. It's a vague clarity we get. It becomes clearer to the extent to which we go within, but it becomes fully clear only when we lose ourselves completely in that infinite clarity of pure being.
Till then, we basically spend more and more focusing inward
Yes.
till
yes.
we get that clarity.
We're not waiting for anything to happen. Because anything that happens is unreal, because things that happen appear and disappear. We are just trying to see more and more clearly what actually exists. What actually exists is Satchit, that ever-shining existence I am. So we just dwell on that more and more. The more we dwell on that, the more we subside into that, and eventually we will dissolve into that. So we're not looking for anything dramatic happening.
Yeah, okay. And then when Bhagavan was answering the questions or actually doing that, whom was he talking to? I mean, he was talking to the people, obviously, but he is beyond the duality, isn't it? So
Yes,
why
yes.
was he even
That-
talking?
That is, we see Bhagavan as that. What was talking? It wasn't Bhagavan. It's the body that is talking. We take it, that body, to be Bhagavan, so we say Bhagavan is talking. But Bhagavan explained these things in several ways. Once when someone asked Bhagavan, when we ask you questions, where does the answer come from? Bhagavan said, the answer arises from the same source as the questions.
Okay. All right.
So Bhagavan is, though he appears to us outwardly in human form, he is actually that which is shining in our heart. And another very nice example Bhagavan gave, that is, in the later years, someone bought a radio. In those days, they called them wirelesses. And this wireless was installed in the old hall. They didn't listen to all things, but occasionally, if there was a classical music concert or something was on the radio, on the wireless, they would switch it on and they all would listen to that. And one day, after listening to some concert of classical music, devotional music, when it was all over, Bhagavan said, see, we've just been listening to this beautiful singing coming from this box. But if we open this box up, we won't find anyone inside, because the sound we are hearing is just relayed through that box, but it's coming from another source. Otherwise, it's coming from the recording state, the studio or the concert hall or wherever it was recorded. Likewise, the body of the jnani. Though the body of the jnani may seem to talk and respond to your questions and everything, if you open it up, the body and mind of the jnani, there's nobody inside. That is, inside this body of mind, there's an ego, an I who's talking. But inside Bhagavan, there's no such thing. So Bhagavan said, whatever words come out through this mouth are coming from another source.
Okay. I think I understand.
That means he's referring to his body as just like the radio is relaying what is transmitted from the radio station. The Bhagavan's body is simply relaying the clarity that is ever shining in our heart as our own being.
Got it.
It's your own self
Asking.
It is your own self talking through the body of Bhagavan.
Exactly. Our own self means our self as we actually are.
Yeah.
And our self as we actually are doesn't actually talk, but it is the perfect clarity, the infinite love. So the love and clarity we see expressed through the human form of Bhagavan is the love and clarity that is our own real nature.
When you are
And that is what I was saying earlier about Bhagavan's look.
Yeah.
Though we see Bhagavan's eyes looking at us, if we are there in his physical presence, it is not those eyes that are seeing. It is what is seeing through those eyes is our own real nature. And what he is seeing, he's not seeing. Bhagavan seems to be seeing this world just as we are seeing. But what Bhagavan is actually seeing is only himself. Because what Bhagavan is seeing and what we are seeing is exactly the same thing. But whereas he is seeing it as it actually is, namely as himself, as pure Satchit, with devoid of names and forms, we are seeing it as this world. So though we are seeing what he's seeing, we are not seeing it as he's seeing it. He's seeing it as it is. We are seeing it as all these names and forms, all this multiplicity. What it actually is one indivisible, pure being, impure, immutable Satchit. But we see it as all this ever-changing multiplicity of names and forms. So we are not seeing it as it is.
We see the many in one, and he sees the one in the many. Or he doesn't even see the many, he just sees the one.
He sees the one in the one, we see the many in the one. Right. But there are no many in his view.
Exactly. So,
but when we understand the truth of each of us is Satchit, then you know, when you see the names and forms, the truth of the names and forms are also Satchit, the truth, one truth, right?
Yes, yes. But it is said, Brahman, it is sometimes said, Brahman has 5 aspects. Satchit, Ananda, Nama, Rupa. Of that, 3 of them are real. Satchit Ananda is real, Nama Rupa is unreal. Nama Rupa is just appearance, but substance is Satchit.
Yeah.
But Nama Rupa is like the forms of the ornaments. Satchit Ananda is like the gold. Gold is the substance. So Satchit Ananda is the substance. That is what actually exists.
Tying that 5 aspects of Brahman to the topic of today, Swami Sadhuvam once said, back then, Bhagavan used to shine in all his 5 aspects, both the permanent and the impermanent aspects. Now he shines unimpeded as just the permanent aspects.
Which is eternal and infinite.
Exactly.
So
he's always here for us.
We should never think that Bhagavan's grace is in any way limited to those 54 years he was living in Tiruvannamalai, or limited to that form in which he was appearing. His grace is infinite and eternal. It's ever shining in our heart as our own being. That's why when shortly before he left the body, and the devotees were weeping, saying, "Oh, Bhagavan, you shouldn't leave us." Bhagavan said, "Where can I go? There's nowhere for me to go. I am always here." Always here means he's always in the heart of each one of us.
Right.
As he said in the first sentence of that note he wrote for his mother, Angangirandu. That means being there. That implies being in each place, or in the heart of each one of us.
Right.
So he is ever present, omnipresent, because he alone is.
Thank you, Michael. These 5 are very important verses because they're very practical as we try to seek guidance, how to go about it and so forth. You explained it well in today's session.
They're important verses, but we need to understand them. We shouldn't just take the surface meaning. We need to go under the surface to understand the deeper implication. And that's true of all of Bhagavan's verses.